So some of the takeaways that we have, when Evan talked about the golden circle, that you focused on the why and the inspiration, passion, and we thought that was a good way to go about it. And then to have the reflection at the end of the day, and to make sure that you keep yourself in check, and that with servant leadership. We talked also about making sure that yourself is taken care of, making it internal, but kind of like the airplane analogy of the mask, making sure that you're ready to help other people. So balancing taking care of yourself and serving others. And also the team versus group, making sure that there's a level playing field, and also to focus on the group, on the goal as a group. And also how to maintain the servant leadership attitude, and that is also, I guess, with the reflection. And then also, as part of the members of the team or group, is that it makes it easier if each one has a role and a purpose, and that helps the team move forward.
Our group took away 3 things. The first thing was about infrastructure and really about embracing others, about we talked about building the right procedures and policies and environments where people could be held accountable. And we talked about how sometimes that's even more difficult to do in servant leadership environments, holding other people accountable. And one of the other points that we really focused in on was culture and how to create that. And we talked a little bit about investigating other people's values and their belief systems, and how do you integrate that within your own culture so that you honor other people, their thoughts, their processing, and create an environment that's conducive to everyone and that embraces everybody and creates more of an engagement-focused environment. We did really like the point about groups of people really proving themselves and becoming teams, so we talked about that for quite a bit. And the last point that we really spent some time on had to do with self-care. And we were really glad to hear that point made by you today, because a lot of times I think we focus on leadership, and leadership really starts with each of us, so that was something that we were really concentrating on. And we also talked about, we were doing some self-reflection in the group, basically, and we were talking about questions that we have to ask ourselves, which is one, what motivates us? What makes us upset? One of our participants talked about, are we leaking out, meaning are we taking our own stuff and spreading that unintentionally to other people? So if I'm angry at you, am I really spilling that over to other people? So just reflecting on who you are, what you're doing, what motivates you to create an environment that starts with you so that you can be a better leader. And we talked about other things like self-reflection and exercising, and really being the best that you can be, not only for yourself, but really it affects everybody else who you touch. So.
We also spent considerable time talking about culture, and several of the people at our table currently or in the past have worked for the county, which can be a very unique and interesting culture. And so we were talking about how do you have impact within that. So we spent several minutes. This started with the conversation about Tom's rituals and celebrations, and just our own personal circle of influence and how we can impact that, and that grows. The other thing we discussed in the group versus team, Edith had an interesting point as retired assistant police chief, I think I said that right. They could oftentimes, as their team, could withstand conflict from within, but conflict from the outside was challenging. So always working as a team on how do we handle conflict that not only is from within, but from the outside, that can be a real test, and how do we do that well. And then we also really appreciated the RAPID strategy.
We spent a lot of time talking about golden rule versus servant leadership. For example, if I open the door for you, am I a servant leader? Or am I just following the golden rule? So it was kind of the means to the end conversation, and what does it mean to actually be a servant leader? What motivates me? What habit of the mind do I have to be able to truly be a servant leader? So we went back and forth on that. I don't know that we came up with any definite conclusions other than You know, again, what motivates us? There are people, if we want to talk a little bit about theology, who do the right things because it's the right thing to do, and it may not necessarily be spiritually motivating. Whereas there are other people who have a faith and who then act out of that faith. So I guess that's kind of where we landed.
Daily reflection, but make it as a defined practice. Put it in your calendar. Do it every day. It's kind of one of our people's talked about how it's really worked through the stand of time. You know, good leaders have always sat back and looked at what have I done today. Next one was gratitude and acknowledgement. We heard that over and over. Understanding your why. Can't take care of yourself unless you really understand your purpose and why you're here. Asking 5 whys to get to the answer. Because usually you ask somebody and they'll tell you something fast, and that's really not the true answer. So keep asking why until you get down to the root cause. Humility, really important. A good leader is able to say, I'm not good at this, and be able to take the criticism and try to work on it and understand they're not good at it. Healthy relationships, probably the toughest one. How do you build healthy relationships? What do you do to make that happen? And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is culture. Culture starts from the top. If the leader isn't good at servant leadership, nor will be the culture of your organization.
Our group did a pretty good job with this discussion. One thing we started off was the courage to really deal with conflict or tough things, like who wanted to speak right now. So everyone was very honest. We kind of achieved that team definition of saying, people said, take the mics, so here I am. But that was really, I think, an important analogy. We spent some time on both courage, the definition of a team versus a group, and how much courage it takes to really intentionally deal with that as a group of people instead of talk about it. The constant reflection on goals and making a difference toward the goal, reminding people that everybody has different needs, and not everything works the same or necessarily is going to work the same with everybody. So using responsibility having the responsibility to address people's needs. And then just that it's not about me. Really talking more about having to think how to help others around you every day and keeping that in the forefront.
We spent a lot of time talking about the difference between team and a group of people and what it really means, or what the importance of being able to go through conflict in a healthy way is, and the importance of creating those safe environments where people are free to speak and share ideas and make mistakes without being fearful of retaliation or punishment. And we also spent time talking about the importance of knowing yourself, nurturing yourself, and really knowing what your purpose is and what your why is.
We started talking about how Christine said knowing yourself and starting with yourself was really important. And so from there, we went on to how we were going to translate what we were learning into a day-to-day operation. And everybody at our table was really impressed that Evan reflected at the end of the day, because he's a young millennial, but as a fellow young millennial, I knew that we were awesome. So, and thank you. And so we really just concluded with listening and how important that is, and how we're going to make that our first step in servant leadership.
But we had 3 key bullet points that came out of the whole discussion. The first one is we cannot serve others if we are not whole ourselves. So thank you for that. That was really good. And then the concept that servant leadership is inside out. It's not necessarily top down or bottom up, but it's inside out. It's ourselves. And then leadership is who we are, and management is what we do.
One of the most important we thought was to get out of your own comfort zone, learn to self-reflect and to really be effective, and then to extend that to look for opportunities to work with your teams and the people that you work with in order to help them self-reflect and really develop a sense of gratitude that we feel is a bit of an underpinning to much of what we learned today. And then finally, I would say that, excuse me, we also agree that you're not really a team until you've learned to go through conflict, and in particular, learn to go through conflict productively. And we think that's really a key point.
Our group talked a lot about the team versus group and the danger of becoming too close as a team, and how we are a work family and maintaining those healthy boundaries as a team. We also talked about the rapid model and the role structure and how instrumental that is in defining everyone's roles within the team, and the courage that it takes to be clear and concise with others with what your expectations are of them. We also focused on the acknowledgement and success of others and being effective citizens within our own groups and acknowledging others' successes and celebrating our wins.
We also talked a lot about self-reflection and to be a servant leader, how we need to reflect upon ourselves. That was a great point that we need to build in. But then how do you then infiltrate your organization with servant leadership? And we talked about how people a lot of times lead their managers. And how do we then, as the employee of somebody, as their manager or as their HR team, support them in servant leadership? We talked about the ideas of coaching, some of the ideas that came across about more communication the better, and just how beneficial that is, dedication to your team members, and then just basically true, honest feedback, 360s, and just how to build that honest servant leadership culture where people feel comfortable and confident to share.
Our table talked about managing expectations, typically at the start of a relationship, and to build a personal relationship, so then you're on equal footing. Letting go, letting your colleagues complete the process rather than, say, as a boss, try to control it every step of the way. We also like the idea of reflection at the start of a meeting. And another really good point was taking time with asking the right question, being comfortable with it, and then allowing there to be space in between before you get to the answer. So then you'll feel really comfortable with the question that you've chosen and then arrived at the answer that you think will work best.
Okay, so our table reflected on Christine's core value, talking about self first before you can lead others. And of course, we really appreciated Nick's talking about having that structure within your organization so that when you have to discipline someone during a performance review, what have you, you can be objective and not use your own biases or emotion in giving them a very objective review. And then we went to Evan, who started out from square one by just entering with a servant leader's heart. We took all of that and we said, what could we think of a real place, real world example of how you live servant leadership? And having Evan at our table, we couldn't help but talk about the incident with the Bucks player, John Henson, who was treated terribly in that jewelry store. And that was clearly an instance of implicit bias, knowing nothing about this person who walked in the store. And the way the Bucks leadership and the management stood up and handled that situation was classic. And it was a classic example of Christine's point about team. They had conflict, and they dealt with conflict in a very public and very objective way by going with the team leadership to the store and talking to the staff and the store owner. And that we thought was an excellent example of everything that we heard today, from core values to self, and just being true servant leaders.
As a table, I think the biggest lesson we learned is that of humility, and in being in a room of profoundly wise people and going almost last.
So you're last.
We're last. We have so little to add. We talked a little bit. We talked greatly about the dynamic between the individual, the group, the organization, the culture. We also talked about the importance of celebrating wins, but recognizing that as a team, when we celebrate wins, those wins may be also inclusive of talking about and debriefing terrible disasters. And that is part of what it means to be a team, is to see what we learned from both the good and the bad things that happened as a team. So.